Well, hello everyone. I am incredibly excited today because I'm putting the shoe on the other foot. I'm Simon Mundie, who is one of the most amazing podcasts called Don't Tell Me the Score, and he has interviewed some amazing people. I was probably his worst guest, but he's got Wim Hoff, breathe, motherfucker. I mean, I love that. Caitlyn Jenner, like Sir Clive Woodward, who Sir Clive Simon actually came and helped me when I was coaching Italy. I'll never forget that. And Boom Boom Becker.
Hey, Boris.
Boom Boom Becker.
That's it.
But thanks for joining me, mate. You have absolutely amazing career and podcast. Obviously, you've been a journalist for a long, long time, and you've turned your sort of strengths in journalism and into the podcast. So, mate, how did all that start, and what does it feel like being on the other end of the stick tonight?
Well, so I'll take that second question first. What does it feel like? Well, first of all, it's 7 a.m. here, so I'm looking out my window. It's still dark. Like I said, it's. I haven't had a shirt on this time in the morning for a long time. I'm hoping the 5-year-old doesn't come in, storming in. But it's funny being on this end, because normally I have an idea where I want the conversation to go. So, I'm having to be somewhat submissive. But it's cool, it's cool being with you, JK. Like, it's ridiculous. As you know, I can see you getting coy already. You don't like me, blowing too much compliments. But, the fact of the matter is, to be talking to you again is a real privilege. I was thinking, actually, you mentioned Caitlyn Jenner. And when I flew to Caitlyn Jenner's house in Los Angeles, I flew by Air New Zealand. Oh, and nice. So they had the safety demo on the video, and you were in it, weren't you? You and the rest of the All Blacks. And I remember, and I was immediately drawn to you, and I was thinking, oh, that's John Kerwin, because obviously, as I said to you, when I was growing up, my father is a huge rugby fan, and we went to the 91 World Cup quarterfinal, semi-final, and final. And as I said, that little part of me before we started recording, as I said, that little part of me, that the inner child, you could say, he had you on that pedestal. So to have got to understand your story, and then to be here chatting to you, this is the third time we've spoken. It's super cool. It's one of those things, and it's interesting watching my brain, how it reacts to it, whether it's like, there's still that part that goes, oh, I hope this goes well. And then noticing that and letting that go, and actually thinking, no, enjoy the experience, because this is, this is you. And then just the fact that we are, we're on friendly terms. That's a really cool thing, that you got to reflect on and say, yeah, the 10-year-old me would be thrilled. So so there's a lot of feelings about being here with you, JK, put it that way. And in terms of my career, well, God, where to start? I did. Do you mind if I tell the longish story, JK?
Of course, mate. We want the long story.
The long story. Okay, so
my man.
Yeah. So I was always a talker at school. I always got in a bit of trouble for having a bit of a loose mouth. And we did one of those sort of psychometric tests, and they said, what do you? It pointed to what they advised people to do, and mine was very clear: journalism. And my passion was Wimbledon, which is. Sorry, I'm doing the mirror, but you can see that picture. Anyway, behind my shoulder, my passion was Wimbledon. So I ended up going to university, did broadcast journalism, and then I went traveling after I finished university to Australia. Lived in Australia for a year, came to New Zealand. I was there in 2003 when England won the World Cup, when New Zealand lost in that semi-final again. And
remember that, mate. It's just great on memory.
I couldn't believe it. The fact that England won something was
awesome.
I mean, it was incredible. It shows the power of belief. That's a whole other story. Say again.
Johnny Wilkinson.
He's been on the pod and talking, about his journey there and after that was fascinating, really fascinating. But I came back from traveling and lost my way a little bit, and I worked doing some other jobs. I did some salesy type stuff, but I always had this sort of part of me that knew that I had my ladder up against the wrong wall. And you know, the universe moves in mysterious ways, and some serendipitous stuff happened, and I ended up going on a radio station, and they said, oh, you're not bad. And I thought, what am I doing? You know, I trained to do this. So, you know, in my mid-20s, I took a big leap sideways out of sales and took a big pay cut, and went and worked for a small radio station. And immediately was just like, okay, I'm in the right place now. I'm earning a lot less, but this is my thing, you know? And then from there, things just went quickly. I was really lucky. Again, just things would happen at just the right time. It feels like I've got a bit of a guardian angel looking over me. People would leave jobs just at the right moment. And I got a job, first of all, Radio Wimbledon. And that for me was, you know, on the first morning at Radio Wimbledon, again, like I said, talking to you, that little boy who used to love watching Wimbledon sat there on the hill. I was just like, I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe I'm doing this. I'm sure it was, you know, I'd love to hear what it was like when you first put on the All Black jersey. You know, it's that feeling of, God, I can't actually believe I'm here. Anyway, fast forward, did that for a few years, worked for the BBC, got a job at the BBC for Radio 1, which is the biggest youth radio station in the country, arguably in the world. Again, you know, when I worked there, I had, you know, feelings of, I'm not good enough for this. You know, I shouldn't be here. They'll find me out soon enough. Did that for a few years, did some great stuff. You know, I covered the Olympics in 2012, the World Cup in Brazil in 2014, Andy Murray winning Wimbledon, all these things. But what I found was that I found reporting on sport just, I hate to say it, but just a little bit shallow, insofar as I was talking about results, and I was talking about tactics, and I was speaking to fans and loving the fans element. You know, what's it like being at this event? And they're like, amazing. So conveying the energy of events, I loved all that. But you just scratch the surface. Interviews were 3-5 minutes long. You do get clips of managers. If I was going into an interview, I would be thinking, okay, what is the line that I can get, the news line? So, you know, this manager says this guy's rubbish, something that will get in the papers. And I just found that a little shallow, whereas my personal interest was really in well-being. I think I was on a bit of I was on a well-being journey of my own. I know we've spoken about yours, but you know, I was really trying to understand myself, understand why I felt certain things, understand, you know, why I had difficulties in certain areas. I had real problems, I think, particularly around, say, intimacy. And all these things were sort of going on. So in my own personal life, I was really interested in well-being, even through to sort of the nature of reality, all this kind of stuff. It really, you know, what it means to be human and all that. And it was going on, and I just felt that I'd love to combine the two. And, you know, I've always thought sport is such a good metaphor for life. If I'm going and playing tennis is my favorite sport. If I'm playing tennis and, you know, I've got lots of other stressful things going on in my life, if I'm playing against someone and I'm serving at 4-5 down, 30 all, I feel anxious. I feel anxiety, and nothing else in my life matters. But at that moment, that is the most important thing. And, you know, and it can feel almost, you know, it's so significant. No one cares, but that's what my brain is telling me. And so I went and I spoke to a boss at the BBC who was who again serendipitously quite liked me. She thought I brought a certain energy to my job there, and just pitched the idea of doing a podcast that brought sport and well-being and life, what sport teaches us about life together, and sold it along the lines of that, you know, in this country there's a real football obsession, soccer obsession. And I think, you know, you either get that language or you don't. And I think there's a lot of people who perhaps switch off to sport because they feel like they're not part of this in language or whatever. But anyone can learn anything from sport, as far as I'm concerned, just from what it teaches us about, whether it be discipline or tribalism or any of these things. And she loved it. She loved the idea. And she said, yeah, you know, okay, great. And she said, what do you like? you want to do it on the Today program, which is this program on Radio 4? I said, no, I'd like a podcast. And she said, fine. I don't think she really understood what a podcast was, to be honest with you. And, I got the podcast, and that was 2 years ago. And since then I haven't missed a week. It's been nearly 120 episodes. And, I've had some fascinating conversations, haven't yet run out of things to talk about. A lot of the same stuff keeps coming up, but yeah, that's the potted history, JK. That was a long first answer, wasn't it?
That's awesome. That was awesome. The two interesting things for me that I'm really interested in about you. I mean, you've been quite open about your mental health. You just talked about one of your sharks, for example, intimacy, all that sort of stuff. I mean, right now, 2 questions. Really, really hard time for journalists, right? It looks like people are losing their jobs. Have to reinvent yourself often. So how are you facing those challenges in your industry around you at the moment? And have you done the podcast also to try and learn about you?
Yes. I mean, I just love having the sort of conversations that the likes of which we had. To me, those are the conversations I would like to have. I like to have, full stop. I can't help but to some degree psychoanalyze myself, my friends, my family. It's what I tend to be drawn towards. I'm a big thinker. My brain's always going, and I'm always trying to understand things. And a lot of my friends would kind of come to me, I think, and ask me opinions on this kind of thing. It's something that is a real natural draw. So I do just feel very lucky. When I started out, or as I do it, I don't tend to do the normal journalistic thing, which is think about my audience or who my audience is, because actually my view is, as with anything, authenticity is really important. And so I try and have conversations that I find interesting. And then my view is that naturally that authenticity, or that will naturally then resonate with people. Because I think if I think too much about, I should be asking this or should be doing that, it might not, it doesn't necessarily land, if you like. So yeah, I think I've learned a hell of a lot, whether it be about the way I talk to myself, about, what's important in life, through to, circadian rhythms, sleeping well. I always quote your, switch your computer off. I'm always telling that story, your shark stuff. So, I'm very fortunate that I have conversations that allow me to be really present and really engaged. And, I'll sit there a lot of the time and just think, I'm loving this. I'm really loving connecting with someone, full stop. And not just someone, but someone who I find really interesting and really respect, about topics that I think are really important. And then obviously on top of that, I might get the, lovely emails from people saying that the podcast has made a real difference to them. And that's just an incredible privilege. So it ticks a lot of boxes. What was your first question, JK? It was
just how I have a lot of friends who are journalists. And
reinventing. Sure.
Your industry right now is like incredibly difficult. People getting laid off. I mean, how do you face those stresses and anxieties? And what do? You change direction? Is podcast changing direction? What do you do?
Well, it's interesting you say that, actually, JK, because to be honest with you, I'm in the middle of that to the nth degree. I changed the terms of my engagement with the BBC recently. So I was no longer a full-time member of staff, and I've changed and I've gone freelance, and I'm providing the podcast for the BBC as a supplier through my company. And as well, I'm writing a book based on the conversations I've had, and I'm sort of producing other podcasts. But I've taken a bit of a leap. I think that it's a really hard time. It's a really interesting time. Journalism is definitely under attack. But there's that sort of stoic idea, isn't there, that within any difficulty there is opportunity. And one thing that one of the themes that continually comes up is around taking risks. So, I'm in the middle of taking a big risk. So I am going to be probably, breaking news. Don't know whether to share this or not, but potentially changing how I provide my podcast. And yeah, I have to say, JK, at the moment, it's a stressful time. I've actually found that even some of the stuff with the book is not what I thought it was in terms of deals I had in place. So I've got a hell of a lot going on. And how do I deal with it? I'm very fortunate that my other half is, she is very, very supportive, and she works in publishing herself. So she works for Hello Magazine, and she is an amazing writer and editor. So I lean on her. I try and live in daytime capsules. A bit like you, just one day. I know that the mind can leap forward and think, this is going to go wrong, that's going to go wrong, and I think just watching out for that. So I try and sort of live in daytime capsules, and then as well, just try and relate to my thoughts differently, and understand that thoughts are not based in reality. I think that's something I'm really fascinated by, is what are thoughts and the impact they have in terms of our identity, the way we sort of see the world. And just, I've got to be honest with you, I just try and have a bit of faith that things will work out, and that there's bigger forces at play, and that, if I look at my life, if when I've taken a path that turns out to have been one that has been valuable to me, for example, getting back into journalism, things have tended to slightly fall in place. So I just try and have faith that that things will work out, and just do one thing at a time. But some days are much more stressful and hard than the others, and it's still a work in progress for sure. Like I think of you, and you talk about how your sharks occasionally will come up when you're not looking after yourself, and I think I could certainly improve in that area. I'm still not great. I push myself too hard. I don't think I'm as kind to myself as I could be. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
that was awesome. But so it was really interesting to, I'm starting to do a few of these podcasts, right? And full of self-doubt. I mean, JK, what are you doing, you idiot? Like, and I know that when you've spoken to a lot of your guests, and you're one of the best, so you've got one of the highest rating podcasts. I mean, do you ever sit there and doubt yourself, thinking, what are you doing, Simon? I mean, and what do you do with those thoughts to control
them? All the time is the answer. Yeah, all the time, for sure. I think sometimes my process for preparing for a podcast, I am thorough with my preparation, and I enjoy doing the research.
You knew more about me than I knew.
I mean, yeah, I loved, I mean, to be honest with you, JK, I hadn't realized why you had been knighted. I knew you were Sir John Cohen, but I hadn't realized why. So finding that out was fascinating. But I'm very thorough with my preparation. And then I think, how I feel is a key element of it. If I'm feeling calm and relaxed, and I can hear the little ones just woken up. If I'm feeling calm and relaxed, and letting go in that kind of surrender, if you like, then I sort of have faith that things will work out. But oftentimes I don't feel like that. Or sometimes the connection isn't quite right. Sometimes I haven't had a chance to do as much prep as I would like. And then those thoughts pop up. But I think, like I said, I'm fascinated by thought, because sort of Eckhart Tolle, who I'm a big fan of. Do you know Eckhart Tolle? Yeah, so Eckhart Tolle, right? He says the liberation that one can find when you realize, you are not that voice in your head. and understanding that when you're under pressure or when you're in the spotlight, when I'm coming onto something like this, when I'm going on the radio, that amygdala part of my brain the danger seeking part will start acting like a burglar alarm and start flashing, which will then mean that the hormones will start hitting my, you'll know better than me, JK, a part of my brain that means those thoughts will come. And I think a really important or valuable thing for me is just understanding that we are not our thoughts. And then that sort of begs the question, well, what are we? And that I'm really interested in, you know, and that was something that Johnny Wilkinson and I spoke about, and I think is actually an area that is going to become a really big, profound, popular question over the next 5-10 years. I think that's my prediction. I think it started with mindfulness 10 years ago. So how do I do it? Well, so there's a technique, a sort of mindfulness technique called acceptance and commitment training, which I found to be fantastic. And it's all about how you relate to your thoughts. So just to dig back into my story a little bit. So when I was in my mid-20s, I'd suffered a really bad bout of insomnia. I think my nervous system I would say is not the most robust. You know, I can get knocked off a little bit, and, you know, I'll admit that, which has its pros and its cons. And so I developed insomnia, and I did all the things that, you know, the internet and people will say. So I got lavender on my pillow, and I started taking this and having hot milk and all this stuff, right? And it didn't work. And I was starting to fear bed, right? And I'd be looking, you know, the back of my mind all day would be, oh, I hope I sleep tonight. I hope I sleep tonight. And as I got closer to bed, and I'd be doing everything, and then I would go into the bedroom and get in bed, and my heart would start going. You know, I was scared of my bed, which is not a good place to be. And I basically found this guy called Dr. Guy Meadows, who I've interviewed on the pod. And he introduced me, this was, you know, over a decade ago. And he introduced me to mindfulness and this acceptance and commitment training. And he gave this wonderful, he pointed something out that is so easy to overlook, which is that we have the part of us that thinks, you know, we call it the mind, you know, thoughts come and go. And then we have that part of us that is aware of the thoughts. And, you know, no thought ever stays. You know, thoughts arise and they disappear. Thoughts arise, disappear. You could say the same with perceptions, what we perceive, nothing stays the same. But the awareness itself is always there. It's always present. It's in the background, but we overlook it because it has no objective qualities. So that for me was like, whoa, mind blown. Okay. Oh, so I'm not my thoughts. So that was the first thing. And then he gave me this powerful technique to use when I was struggling with sleep, which was, if I have a thought that pops up in the middle of the night, or as I'm trying to go to sleep, saying, I'm not going to sleep, or tomorrow's going to be horrendous, I'm going to have bags under my eyes and I'm going to be a mess, then is to notice that thought from that place of awareness, and then just add in front of it a prefix. I am having the thought that. So it would go, I am having the thought that I'm not going to sleep well. I am having the thought that I'm going to be rubbish tomorrow. And in doing that, it untangles you from the thought. And also, after that, I would come into my feelings. So I would feel my face on the pillow, and I would, perhaps bring my attention to my breath or whatever. But that also powerfully would send a message to my amygdala that this thought about not being able to sleep, it's not a threat. And so over time, my amygdala learned that bed and the thoughts I had about bed were not a threat. And over time, my sleep improved. So that technique, though, is something that I could apply in any area. So I remember when I was doing London 2012, Super Saturday, very famous day here in the UK, because it was the day that there were 3 gold medals won within about 2 hours in the Olympic Stadium in London. And I was doing a report for TV, and it was the first time I was doing a live report for TV, and I could feel this anxiety rising in me. Okay, the thoughts coming on, like, what if I don't say the right thing, and what if this goes wrong? And this, and I wasn't particularly adept at the time of using this technique in a different way. So I was trying to get rid of this feeling of anxiety. I was trying to push it away or ignore it. And obviously that doesn't work. You know, if you do anything, you're essentially what you resist persists, that old thing. And this anxiety just grew and grew and grew, and threatened to overwhelm me. You know, I was probably shaking like a leaf before I went up. Fortunately, as is often the case, the adrenaline kicks in, and I was fine. I got through it, and no one would have known. But the experience was not a pleasant one. So when I reflected, though, what I did was I learned that, hang on a sec, I need to marry these two things together. So when I had those thoughts, for example, you know, what if this broadcast goes badly? And I will still have that now. What I'll do is I'll notice that and add that prefix in. Oh, I'm having the thought that this is going to go badly, and welcome those thoughts in. And as a result, you know, send a message to my clueless amygdala, who can't recognize, split one thing from another, that this is not a threat. And as a result, you know, I'm actually able then to sort of reframe it into it's you know, this is something to enjoy. It's like coming on today. Okay, of course there were thoughts in the morning of like, God, you know, it's early. I haven't had any breakfast, and what if I forget who I've spoken to? I'm having the thought about all these things, and just notice, let it go, bring yourself back into the present, feel my bottom on the seat, let go, surrender, and see what happens. You know, surrender v control. That's a key thing.
I think I'm smiling because it sounds so much like some of the things that I went through, especially with my mental health around sleeping and stuff. I got told once, I can't remember by who, but they said, you should always challenge your thoughts because they lie to you. And so often, and I think the other thing that highlighted for me was, you probably got two things going on. So you recognize your thoughts, but also you've got the preparation behind you. Because I often think people say to me, you know, is it one thing? I say, no, often it's a few things. So when my mind lies to me, I question it. No, you're lying to me. You know, and the second thing is, I will succeed because actually I've prepared, or however you come to make peace with how you do things. I think that's also very important. So the one thing I wanted to ask you is, all these amazing people you've interviewed, has there been a common thread around their wellness and their success? Is there something that, in your opinion, after doing all those interviews, you go, wow, yeah, okay, they seem to have this in common, or no?
Just before I answer, I just want to say about the preparation thing. Just very quickly, a line that popped in my head that a few people have said, which is a common theme, is that preparation is confidence. Sam Warburton, you know, Wales captain, he said that. Clive Woodward said that. Ben Ainsley, Britain's greatest sailor, said that. You know, preparation is confidence. It's that feeling of, okay, I've done enough. And that's how I feel with the podcast is, I'll just sit down and I'll be researching. And then at some point, bang, I'm like, I've done enough. And even if I'm having my worst day, I know that I've done enough. So first of all, I think preparation is confidence. You know, I think in terms of my guest, it's a funny one because I think top level sport is interesting because it's so demanding and so all encompassing, and in a way lacks a certain balance. And then also it's you know, people are, because of the society in which we live in, where celebrity is very important, sports people are now celebrities. And so, you know, in my industry of broadcasting, if you're successful, you get known as talent. And if you get known as talent, then you get treated as talent. I'm sure you know what it's like, JK. You know, you'd certainly fall in this bracket. You know what it's like. Like, people treat you differently, I'm sure, to a certain degree. And I think something I've realized is that the number of sports people who struggle when they retire, and because I think, you know, being a top sports person, your career is relatively short. So, you know, if you're lucky now, mid-30s, something like that, and you're still you're still really young at that age. And all of a sudden your identity to some degree is gone. And so this has certainly been an interesting theme, and also something I've observed, as a sports reporter myself. And there was some interesting research that says something like 50% of elite athletes struggle with their mental health when they retire. There are various reasons for that. It's been suggested, whether it be the routine and the support they get, but a really big part of it is around identity. And there are a couple of people that spring to mind. So Johnny Wilkinson was one, and Jamie Peacock is another. So Jamie Peacock, I'll start with Jamie Peacock. So he was the British Rugby League captain, and he was quite rare. And I spoke to him. Fascinating guy, lovely guy, really humble, just a really great guy, really good. One of my favorite episodes. Not quite as good as the one with you, JK, but it's top 10. All right. And so you're a good liar. JK, I'm always pushing our episode. I promise you, JK. And I said to him, why do you think that you were able to transition out of sport so well? And he said, there are two things. First of all, to understand that as a sports person, you're learning some really valuable skills that are applicable in everyday life. So, when he was playing in his rugby team, if he came up against a stronger team, he would be having to solve a solution. He's having to think, okay, this team are expected to win. So how are we going to solve this solution? How are we going to, work this out? So there are skills around problem solving, but also around reflection, around, being honest with yourself about your performance, all those type of skills that are actually some people overlook that can be applied in so many areas. So that was one thing. But then the other thing that he said that really struck me was around identity. He said he never, ever looked in the mirror and said, I am Jamie Peacock, the rugby player. He would say, I'm Jamie and I play rugby. So it was just it was something he did. It was never his identity. And I think that this is a really sort of significant point is, I don't know what it's like. Well, I'm sure it's similar in New Zealand, but the first question anyone gets asked at a dinner party, certainly here, or in conversation, or one of the first is, what do you do? So all of our identity is bound up in what we do in a lot of cases. And obviously that's particularly the case with sports people because they're held in such high regard. So I think the degree to which people associate with their role, I think that's really significant. And so some people have been able to really move through that and just take the lessons from what they've learned from their sport and move seamlessly through. But a lot of people, whether I've spoken to or I observe, really sort of get stuck in the past. Perhaps there are a lot of pundits, I know you're a pundit, but you've got various other hats, right? But there are a lot of pundits I see around who are still, I'm that guy. I'm that guy that did something 10 years, 20 years ago. And Johnny Wilkinson, he and I share a love of fermenting. So I make kefir and he makes kombucha and stuff. And he's got a company called Number One Kombucha. And the story behind it, I think is really interesting because it's NO.1, number one, spelled like that. And he said, it's got two parts to it, which is that by all means, strive to be number one, strive to be number one. But if you remove that dot, you're no one. And I think it's really powerful because, it's separating who you are from what you do and the degree to which you're able to do that. So if I think Will Carling, I'm sure you played against Will, right? So Will, when he retired, he had a rough time because he was a bit of a cad. He was seen as a bit of a cad. There were various, stories in the press around his, his private life. So he had a really rough couple of years, but actually it ended up being a bit of a blessing because he said it completely sucked the air out of his ego. And as a result, now he's got very little rugby memorabilia. He's like, no, that was then. That was fun. The relationships I had were great and I still have my friendships, but that was then. I'm not clinging on to this past identity, and his new identity, it's around the businesses he does, but also his family is so important to him. Mike Brearley, who was the England captain, cricket captain, he was, as soon as he retired, he became a top psychoanalyst. He he was president or chairman or whatever it was of the British Psychoanalytical Society. So he left that identity behind and he moved on. But it's the ones, I think, who struggle, whose identity is so bound up in what they do, that seems to be be problematic once people retire, and is also perhaps why it goes to their head while they're playing, perhaps to a certain degree. So I think that identity, that question of identity, is really significant.
I had to make peace with my ego, because I think, and I see this a lot, and especially when people say to me, you're an All Black and all that sort of stuff, I judge people who are the best as All Blacks. So I see All Blacks, you're an All Black for me because you strive, you've got a successful podcast. I meet business leaders that are, for me, All Blacks. And I think an All Black for me, if you take it off the rugby field, is someone that striving to be the best they can be every day. They prepare properly. They want to be world's best. But I also think that you've got to let go of your ego at some stage. And, talking about, when I was probably my mental health challenges, I was incredibly confident, but I was also incredibly grumpy if I played badly, right? So my emotion would go up with how I was actually performing, right? And I don't know, are you the same? Like you are now in a situation where you might get off a podcast with me or someone else and people don't like it, or you get criticized. I mean, do you separate your identity from your work, or how do you do that? Because I know that's one of the problems that rugby, people who suffer after sport, like you just said, suffer from that sort of, I'm attached to my performance.
I mean, the truth is, yes, I do. I do get affected if I think that I have not done particularly well. Look, I would say a pattern of mine that I've had to come to peace with. You talk about, we've spoken about making peace with the past, and I know where the self-criticism or that judgmental voice comes from. I can tell from the tone of voice exactly who it is and where it comes from, right? So, it does pipe up, and then it's the degree to which I kind of go along with that, and I think that part of that is what you talk about in terms of looking after myself. So if I'm tired and I'm overworked, then I'm more susceptible to falling for that voice. But if I'm looking after myself, I'm not. But I do think that I'm good at understanding that our intrinsic value as people, human beings, that the key element of it is it's unchangeable, and it is you can't increase your intrinsic value or decrease it by what you do. You can improve your behavior, you can improve what you contribute to the world, and you can improve your how kind you are to other people and to yourself. You can do all these things, but that's all behavior. But who we are can't be, the value of us can't be altered up or down. And this is, I think, what Johnny Wilkinson was getting at when he said, number one, no one and no number one. Strive to be your best, but know that it never, ever makes you better or worse than anyone else. And the analogy I always use is, it's like when babies pop out, right? If you lined up 3 babies next to each other, you wouldn't, and they're obviously lovable and, absolutely perfect as they are. There's nothing wrong. You don't look at a baby and think, yeah, cute. They've got a lovely innocence about them, but what has he or she done? What have they done? You don't do that. It's only later that we start doing that. So I think I do understand that our intrinsic value is innate. And there's a really interesting guy called Albert Ellis, and he came up with this thing called rational emotive behavioral therapy. And this was one of my favorite podcasts. I did two. There was a woman who did Ironman called Lucy Gossage, one of the best British Ironman athletes. And I also spoke to her psychologist. And through them, it was about self-talk and the role that belief plays. And through them, I got introduced to Albert Ellis and REBT. And this is all about, it's slightly different from that noticing your thoughts and letting go. It's like what you said, about challenging your thoughts. So most people are A to C thinkers. A is an activating event. Okay, something happens, right? I have a bad podcast, okay, and or it doesn't go quite right. I get off, or let's say that the tone of the voice of the person at the end of the podcast, I perceive it to be disgruntled, and then as a result, I feel stressed, anxious. So that's C, which is the consequence. Now, most people are A to C thinkers. They think that the activating event leads to the consequence. But in the middle, there's a B, which is the belief. And then that tends to relate to, how we think about ourselves. And this guy, Albert Ellis, so it's a fascinating ideology. And it's basically the first cognitive behavioral therapy. But he talked about radical self-acceptance. So striving to do and be your best, but whilst accepting yourself completely and fully. And there were various, I think the three sort of beliefs that underpinned, as far as he's concerned, all the other negative beliefs were three beliefs. So one was that we need acceptance, we need approval from other people. And if we don't get it, we will be worthless or we will suffer or whatever. Okay, so that's number one. Other people should always treat us well. And if they don't, they deserve to be punished. And the world should be, or life should be easy and, stress-free and flow and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of us hold, one of these three things. And I know like mine's definitely, I have a bit of one around, God, why is it so hard? But also around approval, So yeah. I think, that has been really, really interesting. So I'm getting much better at separating what I am or who I am from what I do. And, that comes back to that whole, what I was saying about being and being that awareness, and so I'm getting better at it, but I'm a work in progress, JK.
Yeah, we all are. And I think that's the beauty of it, And I think another thing, talking about sports people, unfortunately, our careers are over in our mid-30s, right? And everyone else is on this longer journey. But I just want to get back to the A, B, and C, because it really resonated with me how you look at the, So what's the technique around the B? Is that how you short circuit? So what is that?
So, so I'm trying to think of an example because something happened. So, something happened the other day. So I think, so someone who likes my podcast, I'll be honest here. Okay. Someone who likes my podcast on Twitter had tweeted about another podcast that's popped up and it's got a not hugely dissimilar sort of method behind it, the way it looks at stuff. I'm not saying that they nicked my idea, but anyway, and this guy had written this tweet, sort of complimenting this other podcast, and on it was a guest of mine, or a guest who I previously had on, and someone who I've spoken to for the book, and I'm having a few complications regarding the book in terms of getting permissions. I'll just say that, which is a bit of a headache going on at the moment. So then I saw this tweet, and then I started to feel a bit stressed. I noticed myself feeling stressed, and I thought, okay, so what's really going on? So I seen the tweet, which is this activating event, and the C is the anxiety. So I thought, okay, what do I believe about this? And my belief was, this podcast is going to get all the best guests now, instead of me, even though I've had this person on. And then as well, this person isn't going to want to give their approval to be in my book, having spoken to. And I start to sort of think, okay, then actually what you do is, so it's A, B, C, D, E. So D is the disputing bit. Okay. So I've uncovered some of the belief around this isn't going to happen. That's not going to happen. and then the D is the disputing bit, and then the E is the new effect. Okay, so I've had a thing. A, tweet. C, anxiety. B, belief that this is going to impact me in some way. Okay, and what does that also say about me? It means that I think the world should be it conform to what I want. Okay, things don't necessarily go that way. Also that this I'm not going to get approval. Oh, there's something there around approval. Okay, so then you start getting into rational or irrational beliefs. Okay, are these facts? Are these true? And I've no idea whether this person will definitively give me his approval to be in the book or not. I hope he will. I look back and I think my track record, hang on, I've got some great guests. I never would have believed I would be speaking to JK and Caitlyn Jenner and Johnny Wilkinson and Boris, Becker, all this stuff. Hang on, the track record suggests that I'm going to be fine in terms of getting guests. Okay, let's not just fall for this. And I went through this whole process of sort of challenging it. And as a result, boom, the disputing of the belief, the consequence of that anxiety, it completely reduced. And I had a far more rational way of looking at things. The way I would describe it for me is,
so you didn't drive over there and beat the hell out of him, because that wasn't that one of your theories?
That he's big. First of all, he's bigger than me, JK, so I wouldn't fancy my chances. But it was almost to me like I would describe it as like having an adult, like an inner adult. How would I speak to a little girl? How would I reassure her when she has these irrational fears around, someone she's watched in a cartoon that's going to come and get her in her bedroom? How do I speak to her, and how do I explain that to her? That same inner voice that suddenly just gets fired up and panicked, bringing that same adult energy to it and working through the beliefs and disputing it and coming out with a new feeling and reassuring it and giving it some evidence and some facts, rather than this just leap to the negative catastrophizing conclusion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally makes sense. And it really resonates, because I was talking to a business leader the other day, and he was discussing a particular issue that he was having. And I said, well, what advice would you give to someone who came and saw you? And often when we internalize stuff, we just create all these complications, where if you came, if you had to come to me with that, I probably would have said, well, listen, Simon, you've done a great job, mate. You got all these guests, and, who cares, right? Or whatever. So I think those things are really important, that, you've just got to sometimes say, what advice would I give to myself?
Do you know what? Can I just tell you a very little story of someone I spoke to, again, in the world of rugby, Nigel Owens. Okay.
Oh, great, man.
Amazing guy. So I interviewed Nigel Owens at the Hay Literary Festival, and obviously, I'm sure you know his story, but he tried to take his own life because he couldn't accept his sexuality. And then in terms of him coming out, it's had this huge impact on other people. And he told me this story about how he basically, him coming out had this huge impact on a young guy in particular who heard his story, had tried to take his own life. And, his parents were worried sick. They had no idea. And then one day they were all sat around the kitchen table. And I think maybe his uncle had said, oh, Nigel Owens is refereeing the World Cup final. And, oh, he's gay, and then that doesn't, great, really made not a big deal of it. And this kid went and Googled Nigel Owens and found his story. And after the back of that, he came downstairs and he said, Mum and Dad, I've got something to tell you. The reason I was going to take my own life was because I'm gay like Nigel Owens. And they were then able to say, son, this doesn't matter at all. We love you and everything like this, and resolved it. And this woman sent Nigel Owens a letter saying, thank you very, very much. Now, when Nigel and I were talking, Nigel used this language where he was like, I will never forgive myself for what I put my parents through in terms of trying to take my own life. I will never, till the day I die, be able to forgive myself. And I said to Nigel, if that boy said to you, I can't forgive myself for trying to take my own life, what would you say to him? Mm. And he said, well, so you've got to sort of forgive yourself. And you could see these, the cogs turning in his head, and it became really obvious. And it's such a, it so speaks to this, doesn't it? That we are so much tougher on ourselves than we ever would be for anyone else. And like you say, when people come to me, I'm good at giving them advice, but turning it inward, that's the challenge. And that's, I think, developing that kind of inner adult is, that's an ongoing thing, but definitely something that is incredibly valuable.
And look, what I often say is that we now need the tools and techniques like what we're talking about. We're talking about cognitive behavior therapy. We're talking about, emotional training. I advise everyone to give them a go because they are so good, and yet we don't talk about them or say that we should be doing them. And I don't know why. We should be teaching every one of our kids these things because it's how long, I mean, I'm older than you. It's taken me, and like you say, it's still a journey, but even today, sometimes my sharks will come back and I have to keep. Of
course, yeah. I totally agree. But it's interesting how these conversations, I think it is starting to come on a lot. And I think with COVID, a lot of people, it's right. The narrative obviously is that it's a bad thing. And I understand, a lot of people have died, businesses are being affected. It's a real challenge for sure. But I think who knows what the long-term impact might be. There may be some positives to come from it in terms of people reflecting on what's important. And one woman I spoke to, she was a school teacher and she retrained to be a psychologist. She was the one actually who introduced me to this Albert Ellis stuff. And she retrained to be a psychologist in her 40s. And she, we spoke about this on the podcast, and she told me, she emailed me yesterday and said how many people have been getting in touch with her saying that part of her story really resonated, that they are thinking that they really want to go in a different direction. And psychology and this kind of stuff, understanding ourselves, what's important, the brain, seems to be a real theme. If you think about it, 10 years ago, mindfulness, who spoke about mindfulness? And now it's everywhere. So I'm optimistic for the future.
I mean, it's a word, a bit like Google, and Uber, like the words that we just didn't use 10 years ago. Imagine if my poor old dad, came back from his grave, he'd be going, "What's going on here, son?"
I know. Hey? Yeah, absolutely. But I totally agree.
Tell me about leadership across all your interviews. I think we've spoken to some amazing leaders. So what are some of the tips that you've taken out of the interviews around leadership and how you lead yourself and others?
I think kindness is really important. I think that, I think we all know this from our own experiences, that when you have, whether it be a teacher, a boss, a teammate who genuinely cares about you and is interested in you, the person, then that makes a huge difference. And so there's a guy I spoke to last week, a guy called Nigel Pearson, who's a football manager. His reputation actually was around being a bit bolshy because he could be a bit arsey with the media. But his players loved him. His players absolutely loved him. And he created this, so many of them say that he treated them like his children, insofar as, he really would care. He would size them up. What does this person need? Does this person need a squeeze on the shoulder? Does this person need to be left alone? But he genuinely cared about people. That was his top value. That's not to say he was a pushover. He had really, high standards that he demanded. So again, it was like being a parent. He set boundaries around what he expected, but he cared. You could say he loved the people, right? And because of that, he created this. Is a very famous, probably arguably the most famous sports story in the last 10 years, outside of like Wimbledon and that, was Leicester City winning the Premier League in 2016. No one fancy. Yeah, there we go, right? And I've spoken to a lot of people from the team, psychologists are there, various people, and they all say it was all down to the closeness of the guys, and they were greater than the sum of their parts because they were like a family. And they all say that this guy Nigel Pearson, who wasn't actually the manager at the time, He'd been sacked just before they went on this run, but it was him who created that environment that enabled them to flourish. And I think the absolutely key thing is that he, for want of a better word, he loved them. He really cared about them as people. So that well-being element was front and center. And I know from companies that I've worked at or bosses that I've worked at that you don't feel that's the case. You don't give your best of those people. Whereas if you have someone who sees you, for want of a better word, sees you and hears you and accepts you and challenges you and sees the person and not just, okay, what is the output I can get? I think that is an absolutely sort of integral thing. There are other things as well, of course. Clive Woodward, just quickly. Sorry, yeah, you look like you're going to say something, JK.
No, carry on.
So Clive,
so
Clive, he talks about it being very much a two-way street. I think in terms of, he talks about teachability and what was the other one?
Coachability.
Coachability and, having being a rock or a sponge. And it needs to be that two-way process. To what degree Martin Johnson was absolutely integral to that as well. Who knows? But, if I had to say, I think it's that Jurgen Klopp. So I've just written a bit on my book actually about this very quickly, JK. Jurgen Klopp. I think Jurgen Klopp is a bit like Nigel Pearson. He's perhaps more so than Nigel Pearson. He seems to me like he's kind to himself. He has really high standards, but he doesn't chastise himself too bad when things go wrong. He separates who he is from the behavior, and then he treats his team, and he's obviously got this amazing charismatic individual personality through which he's able to channel it, but he cares about his players and his team. And as a result, they feel there's a sort of safety that they feel to be able to express themselves, to be able to go out and take risks. The young guys have really thrived under him. So creating that environment where it's like, look, you give me your best and I will support you. You take risks, be true to yourself, go and express yourself. And you have my full support. But what I demand of you, or what I need from you, is for you to give me everything you've got. But you do that, and I've totally got your back. And to me, that is a theme that's sort of come through that I think is really, the human element of caring.
Why do you think there's a perception out there? And I think it's a perception that it's dangerous because people who get into positions of power feel that they have to be tough, or they have to be, that grumpy bastard or whatever that is, So what? Because it's generally in the teams I've been in, it's not true.
No. Do you know, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I think the way I'd answer this would be to say that it takes sport and politics. So you're Prime Minister, okay? So I would suggest that she's an evolved leader. I've had this conversation with Dr. Pippa Grange, who was one of the top psychologists for the England football team, got them over their fear of penalties and took them to a good place. And she cited Jacinda as an evolved leader, as in someone who consults those around them, but wants to take people with her. And creates a consensus, will ultimately make the decision, but takes people with her. And then, as we know, there are lots of, shall we say, populist or strongmen type leaders in the world at the moment. And I would say that there's an element of that's the old way. And what I find interesting in sport is that the narrative around winning and winning at all costs is being challenged currently. And I think part of that is down to the fact that the number of women playing sport and or the media coverage of women's sport is increasing. So it's almost like the feminine is coming in, so it's not just this kind of macho masculine stuff that's obviously been front and center, in the worldwide culture for so long. That the feminine is rising up, and you need that, I think, as a bit of a balance. And I hope that more, even within ourselves, JK, do you have a feminine side to you?
I had 3 older sisters. I'm the youngest.
Yeah, right.
That's why I've got 150 pair of shoes, mate.
Yeah, you always scrub up well, for sure. I thought there'd be something in that. So I've got an older.
I think if you actually ignore your feminine side it's dangerous. I think
Oh, totally.
we all have a feminine side, I believe, emotionally. And so I think when you try and repress that, or if you're scared of it, that's when you start trying to be something you're not.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I really, I went back to my old school for a reunion recently. And when I was there, it was an all boys school until girls in the sixth form. But since I left, it became co-education. And I asked the teachers what change they saw. And they said that, when I was at school, you would get rewarded by your peers for badly behaving. I was very mouthy, right? So, if you're the smart guy in class, everyone laughs and, you got a certain status. But, I don't think the same is necessarily true. I hate to generalize, but I don't think the same is necessarily true in girls. And so I asked these teachers what difference they'd noticed. And they said what they noticed was the boys have become better behaved and the girls have become somewhat less anxious. So I think, you need that balance. And I think that, within men and within society, the rise of the feminine is a good thing. And hopefully then what you talked about in terms of this need to be bolshy and whatever else, that will slowly sort of go away. And I think there are positive signs, like I said, with Jacinda, she's a new style of leader. And hopefully we'll see more of that. It's not zero sum, squash the opposition. It's more like, compete, but take people along with us. We're all in this together. COVID showed us that, right?
Yeah.
There's, it's not like one country be another country. We're all in this together, and we need that cooperative outlook.
If you could take all those interviews and then you've got a room full of leaders, what would you tell them to implement around well-being as business leaders?
I would possibly say, I just would say it's people first. I think, if you, it's got to be people first. What is it? I think it's Bhutan is the only country that doesn't gauge the value of their society on gross domestic product. They actually try and gauge it in terms of happiness, in terms of well-being. And I think, like I said, if I remember at school, the teachers who saw me, as in saw past the naughty,
Lippy,
pain in the
naughty,
the lippy, the pain in the arse, all that stuff that I would be getting sent out of class. The ones who were able to see through that. There was one geography teacher who I'd be messing about in class, and he'd just write up on the board, "Simon is here." And goes, "Simon, it's fine. We see you. We see you. We know you're here." And and they just shot me down, and I loved him for that. I was like, I'll work hard for you now, right? And I just think, the top value I think of if so I've just set up my own company, and if I get to the point where I grow it and hire people, I'd like to think that the top value will be the people, rather than if you I know from my own experience, I'm sure lots of people understand this, being part of a company and just feeling like you're there as capital, as something to provide output, and therefore you're judged like machinery. We judge machinery in terms of the output it produces. I don't think we should judge people in terms of the output they produce. That's what we want, but how do we get there? You've got to see the person. You've got to value the person individually. Sir Alex Ferguson, he was well known for knowing everyone at Manchester United, from the guy who was cleaning the locker rooms to the people in the in the cafeteria. He knew them. He knew their families. He knew when their kids' birthdays were. He cared about people. So no wonder he was able to create this winning environment. He went above and beyond. Yeah, he was hard man, no doubt about that. But he also had that humanity, and he cared. So I just think you can't get away from genuine care, and not fake care, not David Brent from The Office style, care. I mean, genuine, what is it about this person? What can I understand about this person? What makes this person tick? What does this person need? You get all that stuff right, and I think everything else flows from it, personally. And that seems to be something that comes through, and I'm sure you know that.
What should I read? What do you recommend I read besides your book when it comes out?
Oh God. What would I recommend you read? Look, some of my favorite books, The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. That's the Stoicism book. I don't think you can. I think The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle is really amazing. If you want to, understand how to relate to your thoughts a bit differently and understand that the thoughts or the thinker in your head is not who you are. So who are you? Big question. And then I'm currently reading The Legend of Bagger Vance. And and so forget the movie, okay, ruined by Hollywood by all accounts. But the book is amazing. So it's based on the Bhagavad Gita, and it's all the big questions about who we are, and it uses golf as the great game where you're battling yourself to compete with others, and that is a really a moving book for me. So those would be three: Obstacles the Way, Power Now, and The Legend of Bagger Vance. But don't watch the film.
So who are you then?
Oh, well, okay. Well, JK, you really want to know this one? I'm you. We're all so. Look, very quickly. Let me
I feel sorry for you then.
But you're not who you think you are either. So I would say, look, very quickly. Let me just explain what I mean by that. So this is something I'm really, really interested in now, and I think that it's really quite profound. Is that okay? Everything we experience in life falls into one of four categories: a thought, a feeling, a sensation, and a perception. Okay, so the thoughts we have, that including about ourselves, our self-image, that's a thought. It's not real, it's a thought. Okay, thoughts come, thoughts go. Feelings, emotions. Okay, I feel sad, I feel happy. Perceptions, what I see of the world. Sensations, being pinched. Okay, that's all we experience is one of those four things. But all of them come and go. All of them come and go. Has any thought ever stayed with you, JK?
No.
Has any feeling ever? All of these things come and go, right? When we fall asleep at night, the world disappears, everything like that. But there is one element of our experience that is always there. And that is what we call I. Now, I is nothing other than the awareness that notices the thoughts, the feelings, the sensations, and the perceptions. But when we say I, most of us, what we're actually referring to is a cluster of thoughts and feelings that we have about ourselves, is self-image. But actually, the I is nothing more than awareness, pure awareness. It has no objective quality. It isn't a thing. It has no objective quality. You can't point at, okay, where is this awareness? But it's the one ever-present element of our experience. And so, okay, if it's the one ever-present element of our experience, the only thing that does not come and go, that has to be who we are, because everything else comes and goes. If you strip things back, it has to be that. And because it has no objective qualities apart from being aware and being itself, that means, it doesn't have individual qualities. And the implication is, therefore, and I hate to be too spiritual, people will be going, this is ridiculous now. But the implication of that is that the being that I share is the same as the being that you share is the same as the being that anyone shares. And that this is known as sort of non-duality. This is what Johnny Wilkinson's into. This is what Buddhism points to, is that, that the I that we all think we are is not, that's the small self. And then the real I is the awareness, and it's the awareness that we all share.
I think that's really profound, mate. I love it, actually, because it's got me thinking. And while you were explaining, I sort of thought, well, if that's the case, then what Michael Jones said to me, which changed my life, was, JK, you've got a good heart. So if I've got all those other things going around all the time, my real belief is that I've got a good heart. And that is my being, As long as I keep anchoring back to that, then I can... things I should do.
Absolutely. Like, it's, again, to come back to the baby analogy, right? Like, a baby doesn't judge itself. Baby just is, and is lovable for just being. And that's at our core, that's what we are. It's just, as the ego develops and we start, I need this, I need that. I need fixing. I need to fix myself, which, as I think it's more about acceptance rather than fixing, or self-esteem even, this judging ourselves. No, if you can get in touch with that innate part of us, that being part of us, then that's where the value, I think, it really is. That's the spiritual.
Now, I don't want you. No, that was awesome. I don't want you to think that I'll ever be as good as you. But who should I interview next? And I won't steal anyone.
Listen. I would say try Johnny Wilkinson.
Cool.
Yeah, try Johnny. And because the stuff I've just spoken about just now, he explains it beautifully. To take the example of pressure. Right? So very last quick story, JK. Right. So he and Clive Woodward have a very different view of pressure. So Clive's like pressure, performing under pressure, and Johnny's like, no, pressure only exists up here. Okay. And now you'll know this from playing sport. Okay. Why do we all play sport? Why do we love sport? Like when I'm playing tennis, I love it because I'm lost in it. I am all the other stuff, all the yesterday and tomorrow and everything goes. I'm there. I'm present. And when someone chokes, when someone has the yips, what's going on? They're becoming self-conscious. It's this question, as he would say. You might say, what if this goes wrong for me? But then you can even slim that down and go, what about me? So it's that me again. But we play sport when people go in flow. When you were at your best, were you thinking much? No. You're just flying, right? It's instinctive. And that's where we play sport. And Johnny, explains this beautifully. And he says when he kicked that winning drop goal in 2003, he says his sense of self it was just a knowing of it. He just was observing the whole time. Ball hit his hand, felt his leg go back, kicked the ball, it went over. And it was only a second or two after the ball went over, he does this little skip because he had been there he said he wasn't there to witness it. Or sorry, he wasn't there. It wasn't him doing it. It was a knowing of it. And that sent him off on this fantastic journey. So yeah, I would really recommend Johnny. And first, have a listen to the one I did with him because he explains it probably better than me. But he's fascinating on this kind of stuff that I've touched on at the end.
Well, mate, I'm never going to be as good as you.
Oh, please stop it.
Tonight thank you, man. That was awesome. I loved it. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you for getting up early and putting your shirt on.
And having a shower as well. I've got really lax.
I won't ask you whether you put your pants on. We were over.
Listen, you don't want to see what's down there, JK. Listen, no, thank you, JK. Like I said, it's a real privilege, and the work you do is amazing. And like I said, I'm always quoting your stuff. I'm always thinking, turn your computer off. I'm even telling it to myself. Speaking to Dr. Fiona Crichton about the dose hormones, that's been fantastic for me. You're both going in my book, just so you know. I hope you'll give me your approval, and that's.
I think I already have it. What I say? Next time I see you, you got to pay me a pint. Was that?
Yeah, that's it. That's a pint I can handle. It's the others I'm worried about. So, and like I said, that little boy who watched you play would be thrilled that I'm sitting here and that we've got to talk. And I consider you a friend on the other side of the world, and that's, to me, it's a really beautiful thing. And I want to reflect on that and just recognize that how wonderful and lovely and cool that is. So to be here talking about a subject like this with you is, hey, JK, life doesn't get much better than this.
Exactly. That's what I think. And I think to be enlightened by some of the stuff that you learned and the way you think has been really good for me, because I love when I learn new things, get challenged a wee bit. So thank you, my friend. Thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure. And I feel the same. We haven't met, but I also when I see you, I smile and we laugh. And I think that's a really special relationship that probably COVID brought to us, because we probably,
Definitely.
We're probably getting way more relaxed in this sort of online environment. But still, you owe me a pint. So I'll be coming to get it as soon as they either get a vaccine or I don't know when it'll be, but it will be.
Wimbledon, that's it. I've said, listen, when Wimbledon's back on, assuming that the BBC still want me there, we'll have a pint in one of the fancy bars at Wimbledon. I'll take you around all the commentary boxes, introduce you to Sue Barker, Boris Becker if he's still there. It'll be great.
Don't I
my
have
pleasure.
to have champagne and strawberries though?
No, listen, that's what the fancy people do, JK. But you're going to be bringing a sense of down to earthness, to much needed down to earthness to the crowd at Wimbledon. So
and then I'll have a story to tell. I went to Wimbledon and I had a pie and a pint.
Absolutely, that would be an absolute privilege.
See you soon, my friend.
Cheers, JK.